Sorry about this. Okay, we're good. Hey, so welcome everyone to our latest webinar in our coronavirus youth sports series, The Path Forward. I'm Tom Farrey with the Sports and Society program at the Aspen Institute. You know, the most overused adjective in the past couple months is unprecedented, but it still accurately captures the health and economic challenges that COVID-19 has brought to our society. That includes the sports sector and all stakeholders with an interest in building healthy kids and communities through sports. Our Project Play team has tried to help in two ways. One, help organizations navigate the near-term challenges. We've created content, webinars, original reporting, a return to play risk assessment tool that can be used as trusted resources by leaders, coaches, parents, and the news media. We also are pleased, we've been so pleased to see how well they've been received. The Project Play Network signups for our newsletter has doubled. To receive our weekly updates, you can sign up on our website or through the link that our team is distributing now in the chat function. The second thing we tried to do during this time is empower you, leaders, parents, coaches, to be effective change agents as we emerge from the crisis. How do we turn this current moment into an opportunity to build a better youth sports model, to reimagine youth sports in America, which we've been talking about for several years within Project Play? The second tranche of our work begins today with this webinar conversation and the recognition that the crisis has laid bare the fundamental flaws in our current sports model. Recreation options that serve low-income kids, already minimized by a shift in recent decades toward expensive travel teams, are threatened. And there is no coordinated leadership in how or when to return to youth sports, the last cog in our sport ecosystem to halt play and the first to restart. I'll talk more about those items in a minute, but first, a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. How to ask a question. We want you to participate in this conversation, and you can do so in two ways. Through the chat function, click the icon at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts. My colleague Marty Fox will be hosting that part of the conversation and post related links. And Q&A. You can click the icon at the bottom of your screen to send questions to panelists. Our panelists will be answering questions in the final 20 minutes of the webinar. We will email you a summary of the conversation after the webinar. We hope you share that and a recording of the session on social media with the hashtag Project Play and tag us at Aspen Inst Sports. To get this important conversation started, we're delighted to be joined by leaders from three of the sectors that can help bring to life a new model. From the community recreation sector, Kristine Stratton, who is president and CEO of the National Recreation and Parks Association. From public health, we have NiCole Keith, who is president of the American College of Sports Medicine. And from national sports organizations, Jean Lee Batrus, executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association Youth Development Foundation. ACSM and Major League Baseball are also members of Project Play 2020, comprised of leading organizations that we convene to help develop opportunities to get and keep more kids playing sports. I'd like to recognize PP 2020 members for the national leadership they have shown since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, from the league shutting down and forcing people to take the threat seriously, to Under Armour and Nike making masks, feeding kids, to the CDC and US Olympic and Paralympic Committee teams developing strong return to play guidance, to the Hospital for Special Surgery at the epicenter, New York, sacrificing to serve their city. That's just the short list of PP 2020 member contributions, and we thank them. With that, let's start to tackle the next great challenge and opportunity. How do we avoid what happened in the last recession when regular participation in team sports among kids fell from 45% in 2008 to 38% in 2014? Not just that, how do we build a model that will get more kids playing, aligned with the needs of communities? You know, I posed this question in an essay that we just published on the Aspen Institute website, How Sports Can Help Rebuild America. The headline recognizes the key to progress is not by asking, and I'm channeling JFK here, not by asking what America can do for sport, but what sport can do for America. We know from history that sport can do a lot public and private investment in community parks, gyms, fields, rinks, school sports, PE, and games like baseball, basketball, and volleyball, and many others help make the 20th century the American century. Today, we have a sport model for where we sort the weak from the strong at ever earlier ages before they grow into puberty, and often based on the ability of families to pay for a sustained experience. Kids from lower income homes are 6 times as likely to quit sports for financial reasons, according to our surveys, as peers from the upper income end. So as policymakers and others move forward on stimulus and other items, what do we think, or what do we need to be thinking about? How do we create a supply of sport experiences and activities that meets the demand for them? Because our surveys suggest the demand will be great coming out of this crisis, but there will be potentially less supply and families will have less money to afford them. You know, I talked to many leaders in reporting out my essay. 3 big themes emerged, or 3 pillars of what a new model could look like that would get and keep more kids playing sports. And so the essay proposes that we commit to the following. Number 1, local, affordable, high quality sport options available to all kids. Local means activities based in the community. It's classmates playing with classmates at sites that are easy to access by bike, car, or otherwise. Reintroduce free play is one of the 8 strategies in the Project Play framework, recognized by experts we work with as a key opportunity in growing participation. So is revitalizing in-town leagues, which ask less of families than travel programs. These remedies have never been more needed, with 21% of parents telling us in our survey this month that it will be difficult for them to transport their child to playing sports. Number 2, the second pillar, is that school sports formats need to meet the interests of all students, not just the best athletes in the school, the kids from the homes that have been trained up through through years of being involved in clubs. You know, these are formats that provide students, the ones we're talking about, the ones we're proposing, that provide all students with an opportunity to play and be active, whether by innovating with PE or treating sports as co-curricular instead of extracurricular, preserving intramurals, or forming as many interscholastic teams as there is student demand for them, or just smartly partnering with community organizations. We need to find the best models and ideas aligned with the educational mission, then elevate them and inspire principals and superintendents and athletic directors to adopt them. The third piece in the puzzle is accountability built into every level of our youth sports system. Youth sports is, and it's been said before, is the Wild West. We've seen that with the COVID-19 return to play situation. Better governance and more accountability is key to addressing many other challenges in our sport delivery system as well, from improving coach quality to controlling costs for families to reducing ACL and brain injury rates, all of which could help us tell a great story 10 years from now. So with that, I'd like to bring in our panelists. And as we do, we'd also like to pose a poll question for you to answer. You'll see it pop up on your screen. If we do not change our youth sport delivery model, where do you think youth sport participation will be by, say, the 2028 Olympics in LA? Will it be down by 20% or more, down by 10% or more, or the same, or will it actually go up? Interested in your thoughts there, so please share them. So with that, I'd like to bring in our panelists here. So let me ask you, let's start with you, Kristine. What do you think is the story that we can tell collectively 8 to 10 years from now? What should we be shooting for?
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here, Tom, and our fellow panelists to talk about what does the future look like for youth sports. And from a Parks and Recreation perspective, we believe we should be aiming to support kids to have healthy development opportunities and truly full access to an array of opportunities so that any kid, no matter where they come from, can achieve their full potential. To get there, yes, we agree with the 3 strategies that you outlined in your piece. For obvious reasons, we identify with the need to have local, affordable, quality sports options available to all kids. And in 8 to 10 years, we'd like to see parks and recreation be seen as really leaders and champions for quality youth sports. In your piece, there's a quote that paints a pretty grim picture of parks and recreation. And this absolutely cannot be the narrative in 8 to 10 years. And that quote was, one reason youth sports has been privatized is because Park and Rec forgot who the consumer is and didn't care about the experience and just worried about satisfying the mayor. And I want to say that parks and recreation professionals are public servants. They are not servants to an elected official. And I am not denying that there are political pressures. However, Parks and Recreation is really there to ensure their communities have opportunities to live a healthy life. And in 8 to 10 years, our vision is that Parks and Recreation professionals will be seen as an essential ingredient to supporting youth development and opportunity. I would say youth sports as a whole, as part of that 8 to 10 year vision, would really be rooted in a whole child approach that would include not just opportunities to support the development of physical skills, but really would help children thrive socially and emotionally. And yes, as you state in your piece, to achieve that 8 to 10 year vision, it really will take accountability and a cohesive strategy to get us there, and one that is really supported at the federal or national level.
Yeah. And is there a place for innovation as well? I mean, Park and Rec's working more effectively with local providers, developing more scalable models, or where do you see an opportunity there?
Yes, absolutely. I think we certainly, when I emphasize that we are an essential part of a youth sports strategy, I really meant that. We certainly cannot do this alone, and it needs to be an innovative collaboration across sectors, across stakeholders, and across providers, from schools to our panelists here today, to philanthropy, to government, and to the corporate sector, of course.
Gotcha. What about you, NiCole? I mean, what is the story that you think we can tell 8 to 10 years from now?
Sure, Tom. So like Kristine, I'm truly honored to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Here's an opportunity to revisit the role of sport in society. And we can do this through a socio-ecological approach using multi-level strategies. It's well documented that sports has several societal influences, and it can contribute to how children view themselves. Sport can create the physical identity and self-worth of children and youth. It can demonstrate whether or not children perceive themselves as achieving success. And it's associated with lots of other kinds of outcomes in terms of both mental and physical health for children. So with this occasion of COVID-19, we have a chance to remind adults and kids of how sport can influence behavior in a positive way. It's a venue where group interaction can occur. It creates opportunities for human contact and good conduct. Sport is predetermined by rules, and so it's an opportunity to create situations that are predetermined. It can create social order and teamwork and perseverance. Sport can create apprehension, but also anticipation and victory and defeat. And we have to remind adults that this is important and can be experienced through sport, not just winning and losing, but all those other factors as well. Sport creates opportunities for individuals to identify ways that they're similar that weren't obvious before, and communities that are similar as well. And so as we're returning to play, it's most important to implement these strategies and to remind adults and children of the other roles of sport, not just winning and losing, but other ways that we can form communities and kids.
Right. It sounds like we almost need to talk to policymakers about that. So they think of sport as not something that is a nice to have, something on the side, but is core to public health and inclusion in our societies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, gotcha. Gene, what do you think is the story that we can tell, or that we should aim to tell?
I'm going to get back to you. There's apparently a fire happening in this building, and there's an announcement going on. I apologize.
Oh my Lord! Holy cow!
I think the.
Okay, Gene. Yeah, do what you need to do, and just join us when you can there. Sorry about that. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, good. So what? So the three pillars of the model, NiCole, which resonate most with you?
Sure. So, Tom, one of the things that resonated with me or reminded me of is that there has to be health in all policies. And that means that as we're establishing policies, be it via education or parks and rec or business strategies, there needs to be health in all policies. And we have to think about it from the standpoint of community health and mental health. And that it has to represent all people, regardless of their ability or their skill level or their background. And while some coaches are already doing this, I would advocate for policies that involve the training of coaches, not just for safety like first aid and CPR, but training to reinforce the development of interpersonal relationships through sport. It's also an opportunity to remind coaches and kids who have been preconditioned to have these conceived notions about people who are different than they are, that sport can be a true unifier.
Right. In terms of health and all policies, how are we doing right now in terms of building, thinking about sport as a way to achieve that?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of health and all policies in general, that notion exists is excellent, that public health professionals are thinking about it is excellent as well. I think that it's happening in health systems and health-related activities. And in some instances, it's happening in sport, but I would say that's still happening at the level of the physical educator and not necessarily at the level of the coach or the parent. And so I think that in some ways, in terms of professional sport, health and policies in professional sport are getting attention as advocates for public or for mental health. But I don't see it being implemented as much in youth sport and at the high school level as it could be. And so I think that there's really an opportunity for growth and improvement in health as it relates to sport-related policies.
Mm-hmm. How do we bring the health sector more into this conversation, right? It always amazes me when we talk about healthcare in this country, there's, actually very little conversation around preventative care, number one, and number two, sports somehow just doesn't make it into this conversation. Any ideas there?
Sure, it's so much closer than you think because in most sporting venues, there are healthcare professionals to offer protection for the athletes. And so they are there and they are aware of both mental and physical health challenges that can arise in terms of athletes. And so I think that they are already at the table in terms of treatment, but there needs to be more engagement in terms of health promotion and prevention and engaging those health professionals. They're busy and they're spread very thin. And so also engaging other kinds of health promotion professionals with student athletes and with youth sport would be an opportunity.
Yep. And Kristine, how important do you think it will be to engage policymakers over the next year in these conversations, given where we are?
Well, extremely important. I want to echo some of NiCole's comments. They're incredibly important to keep in mind, that idea of having a health policies, whether it's youth sports or otherwise, rooted always in a health lens. We know that social determinants of health are tremendous factors in our outcomes. Those shouldn't be ignored just because we're talking about youth sports, of course. And I really want to emphasize that idea of a whole child approach that emphasizes not just the physical skill building, but also, making sure our coaches are informed around a trauma-informed care lens, that they understand their role as mentors, that they are aware of and educated on the real terrible trajectory of increasing levels of anxiety and depression among youth. So that youth sports can be a tremendous solution to that trend, which is really disconcerting. And however, in order for that to happen, I think that point of making sure that health is really infused in the whole array of engagement around youth sports. So I would call that out as a missing pillar, Tom, in terms of those three that you identified. The other missing pillar for us, it's referenced, you talk about having a more sustainable sports, and this gets to your question of, do we need to be involving policymakers? We do. We need to be involving policymakers, both in terms of addressing the programmatic needs, that whole child, that health-informed programmatic model that really supports coach training, institutional training, and other mechanisms that are going to support that. But we also need to have a sustainable financial model that you rightly pointed out. That needs to involve policymakers, because the investment that I think that we'd be calling for in order to get a head start towards achieving this 8 to 10 year vision, really demands a sustainable financial model. So we might even call that out as a distinct pillar in and of itself.
Yep. Yep. If you were to pick one policy to put in place, one policy that would help bring to life more community-based, affordable, quality sport activity, what would it be?
Well, we are, Parks and Recreation are really actively advocating for investment as part of federal stimulus, post pandemic related federal stimulus, in the form of infrastructure and workforce development. So the one policy I think that we're desperately needing is an infusion of capital. We know that we've had a historic inequity in terms of access to places to play. In fact, if you take urban settings alone, 1 in 3 people do not have access to a park within a 10-minute walk from home. And even if they do have access to a park, it's not necessarily a well-maintained, quality green space that's safe and welcoming. So we know that there is a tremendous backlog in terms of deferred maintenance and capital projects across the country, from local parks to state to national. And in just taking national, we've got an estimated over $60 billion backlog in terms of capital projects. So one of the things that we really are desperately in need of and urging is that investment in our local communities, so that they can really start to address the historic inequities in terms of investment in community infrastructure, as well as create those spaces that are going to be so important to providing the access that we really want for youth sports.
Yep. Gotcha. NiCole, how does that, your thoughts on that?
Would you like me to comment on what Kristine just said? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it absolutely resonates. Access, as I mentioned earlier, is a real issue with kids. And so creating policies that provide access is super important.
And
schools,
nearby play spaces and so forth.
Sure. So schools, so the National Physical Activity Guideline Midterm Report lists schools as the target. And so they have to be, but unfortunately, schools are not always built in locations that are easily accessible to kids, and they have to rely on the adults in their lives to get there. So creating communities that are walkable and bikeable are really important. And city planners, I think, are an important group of people to target that are really non-traditional partners in sport and physical activity. But they can develop communities that have that provide opportunities for kids to transport actively and safely. So communities with green spaces where kids can participate in free play, but also communities where kids can get to walk and bike to school on their own, and that have traffic calming measures so that pedestrians and cyclists take precedent over cars and vehicles. So I think planners are really important if we're targeting groups with policies as well.
Right. So community recreation groups and even the sports sector alone can't solve this. It's got to take the people who actually design the hardware of our communities to figure this out. Jean, you're back. I hope you're okay.
I am back. I did run down a flight of stairs, and it must be one of my neighbors. So we had to evacuate. A little excitement for this group, and I apologize needing to step out. So I'm actually sitting in the car in the parking lot.
No, you're not. You're at a ballpark. I can see in the background.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, welcome back. So we've just been talking about different, the importance of policy at this time. What any thoughts you have on engaging policymakers and any key opportunities we should be exploring?
First, thank you, Tom, and to the Aspen Institute for hosting this very important topic and representing both Major League Baseball and the Players Association. From a funder's perspective in grant making, first of all, just the return to play. I think when we look at policy making, as we try to figure out how to step back on the field, we have to look to the CDC, WHO, state and local governments to really guide us forward. So that's first and foremost, is figuring out how to return to play in a safe and healthy manner. After we pass that point, it's really thinking about our stakeholders, and we need to all work together, from schools, parents, municipalities, policymakers, leagues, and everyone has the same agenda where we want to get the kids back into play. So I think policymakers are going to be a really critical part of this conversation. And I would say thirdly, involving the NGBs is going to be very important, especially when we look at how do we have high quality coaching and how do we reward coaches? And we need to be nimble and we need to be responsive in a market economy that has been disrupted. And I know that, we're all disappointed. Many jobs have been lost. We're, facing hunger insecurity, but there's also an opportunity to really look at free and low cost localized play. And so from the perspective of our joint funded foundation, we've always been in the space of wanting to fund low income, free cost play for underserved communities and really bringing diversity back into baseball and softball. So for us, we think that there's huge opportunity in this, but without the support of policymakers and other stakeholders, it won't be possible.
Gotcha. Yep. Well, good. So I would like to talk a little bit about, key partnership opportunities in the community. And NiCole mentioned that the, working with community planners to address, transportation challenges and getting to recreation sites is really key. What about, where schools are built themselves? Can you talk a little bit more about that, NiCole, and the opportunity that might be there?
Yeah, so we have to keep in mind that some communities are fortunate that they have multiple schools in the community, and so multiple opportunities for kids to play organized and unorganized sport. But not all communities have that. So I did previously talk about building schools that are accessible, and that tends to be a problem in many communities, whether they're urban, suburban, or rural. But some communities don't have schools at all. And so it's really important that even though many national leaders are saying schools are the target, to provide other opportunities and programs. I spoke with Jean earlier, and she gave me a little bit of education about how putting programs in the school aren't helpful unless you include people as well. And so it might be an opportunity to reallocate resources for programs that had not traditionally been in schools, but are not necessarily open or available for children and youth to utilize, to maybe reallocate those resources and people into locations that are accessible, including schools, but also park and recreation facilities that are nearby, or neighborhood community centers that are nearby for kids. And so those kinds of partnerships are really important, to not just put the programs there, but to put the people there. And when I say people, I mean the adults who can help support kids in this manner, either on a volunteer basis or a paid basis if those resources are available.
Mm-hmm. And Kristine, where do you see the opportunity in partnering with schools?
Yeah, I would jump onto NiCole's observations that I think if we take a holistic look at our communities, partnership between parks and recreation and schools can be a real game changer. And I would just say there's a mantra in Parks and Recreation that goes something like a school district kid is a park and recreation kid as soon as the school bell rings. So what we need to do is be looking, I think the point earlier about really engaging city planners and having that holistic look at how do we provide services to our communities? How do we provide access to youth that is the most accessible possible, so that we're maximizing the potential for as many kids as possible to participate? That's just a base level of what do our facilities offer in terms of flexible use. So looking at joint use agreements between schools and park and rec, looking at the opportunity to really then layer on creative programming that's flexible and adaptable, that isn't really going to be jeopardized by shifts and trends and fads. So just taking one example of that, Tom, you cited in your piece an example that I think is just tremendous and it bears repeating, and that's in Tacoma, Washington, Metro Parks Tacoma. In 2015, they had 256 kids enrolled in soccer. This past year, they have 1,400, and that's a 450% increase. Now, there's been additional exponential growth as well in basketball, baseball, volleyball, flag football. And the key for them was the partnership with the school district. Instead of requiring parents to be shuttling their kids to park and rec facilities necessarily, they took a holistic approach and looked at the 36 elementary school sites around the city and identified ways to really leverage those sites to actually do on-site programming. Again, to make it more convenient for parents, more adaptable to kids' schedules, which we know is a real barrier for parents. And in addition, they're partnering with other NGOs like the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA to really deliver high quality program experience. So there's an opportunity also to layer an equity lens onto this as well, because they took an approach of looking at those sites that had higher levels of free and reduced lunch program participation and really targeted those to ensure that there was an emphasis on reaching kids where they really need it most. So I think that idea of taking a holistic look, taking a community level approach that really identifies creative ways of delivering quality sites and quality programs to address that access.
Yeah. My takeaway from that example is it's just a reminder that it actually doesn't cost a ton of money to get kids playing sports. A, they want to play. B, it doesn't have to. I mean, you should cost $2,000 a year to play soccer. The key is really just developing these partnerships and taking programming into the communities, including the schools, where kids already exist. We saw this play out in Detroit recently as well. And this is a city where fewer than 200, it's hockey town, right? And there were fewer than 200 kids playing hockey in the city of Detroit for many years. And then 2 months ago, the NHL, in partnership with the Red Wings, introduced a program that's going to get 30,000 kids touching the game of hockey. How? By taking hockey into the schools around the city of Detroit, through not ice hockey, but through, floor hockey and more accessible, affordable forms. So, it's amazing what can be done with partnerships, particularly as related to the school. So, I mean, Gene, any other piece to this, partnerships that you think that need to come online to be able to tell the story that we think can be told in 8 to 10 years?
Well, I think there's going to need to be new mechanisms for funding. And one initial thought, the beauty of the Aspen Institute Project Play 2020 is bringing other funders like the Ralph Wilson Jr. Foundation, where we're looking to co-invest in large projects. And, while we are the baseball industry, there's just endless need out there. And when I think about infrastructure, kids need high quality or good quality facilities and fields to play on. And with that said, unless we do pool dollars together between other funders, public and private foundations and corporate foundations, we won't be really able to move the needle in a significant way. But there is an opportunity, as I said, to bring back localized play, for low cost entry points. And so when we think about partnerships going forward, multi-stakeholders are key, but definitely from a funding perspective, as municipalities and states are losing revenue, due to what's going on, it's just awful what's happening across the country. And so I would say this is a call of action for us to think about our priorities. How do we change our investments and be a little more strategic and to drill down and, work with, organizations like, Kristine, would love to have a conversation with you afterwards. And historically, we worked very closely with localized, park and recs departments, but they're going to become even more relevant going forward. So, I think it's not too early to start thinking about these things and in that direction. And I know that I'm excited to build a stronger network amongst other fellow funders.
Mm-hmm. Kristine, how do we make sure like park and recs are under budgets are already being cut? Next year's fiscal budgets are going to get cut further. We know that mayors appreciate the value of park and recs, but we also know that during times of crisis, recreation is one of the first things to go. How do we minimize the near-term damage so there are the people and the programs to put, there's the capacity to put some of these new innovations in place?
Yeah, great question. I would say, and thank you, Gene, would love to partner with you. It's going to require a real broad-based level of support and engagement to make sure that we don't see the same thing happen that we saw, after the Great Recession or during the Great Recession. Yes, 86% of people that we surveyed reported that they saw local parks as either essential or very essential to their health and mental wellness during the stay-at-home orders and during this pandemic in terms of achieving their overall well-being. So we know that people recognize the value, but that doesn't necessarily translate into the political will to sustain budget investment in these resources, which is ironic because if there's an escalation in fire risk, we don't cut our fire departments. If there's a crime wave happening, we don't cut our local law enforcement. And yet here we are, the demand we've seen over the last few years for access to parks and recreation has increased steadily. And yet they are the first departments to get cut during a financial crisis. We saw that again during the Great Recession. At the state level, there were cuts upwards of 60% in terms of the worst cases, and the average was around 20%, 25%. We already know, we've surveyed our park and rec agencies, and over half are reporting that they've already been asked to cut their current year budget and their next year budgets, and those reported cuts are upwards of 20%. So we need everybody to support continuing investment in their local parks. And I think the real need is going to be that philanthropic engagement as well as the corporate and federal level support to make sure that we're able to provide the services that our families so desperately need, especially during hard economic times.
Right. How important will it be to connect the silos within a particular community? So there's partner recs, there's schools, there's the corporate sector, there's really 8 sectors touch the lives of kids. How important will it be to kind of develop a shared agenda and a movement, so it's not just Park and Rec that's advocating for such a thing?
Extremely important. And in fact, where there has been strong interdepartmental partnership, between parks and say police and fire, between parks and public health, that's where our Park and Rec departments have expressed that they've had the most success in preserving their budgets for those programs that really serve joint needs. NiCole was talking about this earlier, how important public health is and having that health lens, really making sure that we recognize the mental health and physical health benefits that the Park and Recreation Department provides, making sure that they're aligned with public health teams and telling that joint story. I mean, I think we can all see evidence of how people have really flocked to their local parks to find restoration and, access to nature, which we know provides important mental health benefits, but also those free and accessible recreational options. They can't go to their local gym because they're closed, but they can, do a run in on their local trails or their local park and rec facilities. So recognizing that link. And the other thing I would say that we need to be thinking about is how are we designing our spaces so that they offer the kind of flexibility that's durable in times of crisis. And I would argue Parks and Recreation provide some of the most flexible resources to communities in times of natural disaster. In times of the pandemic response, many of our agencies have provided access to their facilities for emergency childcare, for testing overflow, for the provision of meals for, food insecure adults and kids. So I think you're absolutely right. Having that cross-sector, cross-departmental kind of whole community approach to what does this look like? How do we sustain our budgets and our investments that are going to, really support our communities and pay dividends going forward?
Yeah. And whose voice has not been part of this conversation to date and really youth sports at all is that of the kids, the online consumer. And then we end up wondering why they only play a sport typically 2.99 years and they're done by age 11. We're trying to address this. We're trying to develop some mechanisms to more, to capture youth voice so people can design better programs and facilities. But I mean, how important do you think that is, or how do you assess that opportunity? Bring kids into the conversation. NiCole, maybe.
Sure, it's really necessary to bring kids into the conversation, and they will inform you of what they want to do, not just with their voices, but with their actions. And right now we've got this stay-at-home order that's slowly being lifted in my community, but I've observed over the last several months, kids are outside playing. They're on the playgrounds. Their parents may be home, but they may not be home. But kids are voting with their feet, and we better figure this out, and we better listen to them, because they're not going to wait around too very long for us to tell them how to return to sport safely. They're going to figure out how to do it on their own. So let's let them help us how to figure it out. It is imperative, because whether we like it or not, many kids love sport and they're going to play, whether we organize it or whether we don't. So we have to figure this out, and we absolutely must include them. Right.
And the next model, let's make sure we notice that free play is. Let's hopefully that's a larger part of the model that emerges from this, because clearly that is connecting with kids and a lot to adults as well.
Yeah, agree. I would say the wonderful, a silver lining of these stay-at-home orders has been how creative people have become in identifying ways to play and virtual play options. And there's a great example out in El Cajon, California. That's a park and rec department does not have a large budget, and yet they've been tremendous at creating virtual programming for kids and families that have been terrifically popular and really show how creative we can be when we have to. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to some questions here. John, you have anything from the people who are participating?
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for this great discussion. So we've got a lot of great questions, about over 100. So thank you everyone for submitting. One popular question, perhaps Jean, you can take this first, and then NiCole and Kristine, feel free to weigh in, is about parents. So a lot of people love these ideas, but also say many parents are in their competitive sports track and don't know how to get off. So how do we get these ideas down to the parent who is coaching the team or administrating the league or just has a child who's participating? Jean, do you want to start first?
So I think conversations like today are going to be a great forum to influence parents, and it might just be natural market forces, with the inability for kids to return to travel sports immediately and needing to find other avenues on a localized level. I think parents are probably going to bump up naturally and, seek advice from forums such as ours. I know across, our league, the 30 major, clubs in our industry, the various clubs have started releasing free resources on their websites to give parents ideas as to how they can re-engage their kids locally, how they can stay conditioned from home and stay safe. And so I know our RBI league team as well on the MLB side, they're doing a really great job in reaching out to the local CBOs and RBI organizations to also connect with parents and give advice in that area. But, I think this is ever going to be evolving, John. We don't have all the answers right now. And, going back to my point of, we want to walk very carefully as we look at CDC and WHO guidelines and to our government officials before we step out and make recommendations to parents.
Kristine, do you have any thoughts about how do we get this to parents, some of these great ideas?
Yeah, well, I think Project Play is a tremendous resource, and the findings really need to be broadcast as far and wide as possible. Tapping PTAs, tapping our other organizations that can access and reach parents. I think every parent wants to do the best for their child. And for some, this has been a sort of de facto assumed, this is an optimal direction for my child, and so I'm going to support it. But I think the findings in Project Play, that question that Tom asked, how do we get the child into the conversation so that they are, that they're helping to inform and drive the services that they're getting and the programs they're engaged in. But I love the work that you've done at Project Play, and I think just more people need to understand it and need to translate that into the decisions that they're making for their kids, or rather with their kids.
And NiCole, any thoughts about how to reach parents?
Absolutely. And so I echo Kristine's comments about the benefits of Project Play and the partnership that the American College of Sports Medicine has had with the Aspen Institute. The American College of Sports Medicine's arm for youth sport is Sanford Health, and including the healthcare provider early is really important. And so when you think about sports screenings and the role of the physician in clearing, the role of a pediatrician for clearing his or her patient to play a sport, this is where the conversation needs to start happening again about the purpose of the sport. I think when kids are little, parents get their kids involved in sport mostly for the right reasons, for opportunities for exercise and for socialization. And that is when the conversation needs to start occurring about letting the kids be involved in the decisions regarding their sport. I have 4 kids, and all 4 played multiple sports, and they would start a sport and want to quit. And our rule was you have to finish the season. And then if you finish the season and you don't want to play anymore, you don't have to. But I think about this really often because 2 of my kids are still competing, one in college and one is still in high school. And if I told either one of them, you got to play a different sport or you can't play sports anymore, they would leave me. And I support them. So it's really not just a conversation that you have with parents, but also with kids early on who love sports about what they're for and what they're not for. But that has to start really early. And I would recommend through a healthcare provider because it is about mental and physical health.
No, those are great thoughts. For Jean, a couple questions popped up for you about multi-sport play. And so since all NGBs and pro sports leagues obviously have an interest in that their kids play that particular sport, what incentive is there for these organizations to have to work together to support, less intense, long seasons and multi-sport options?
That's a great question. And it's been one on my mind just because Project Play has really focused on sports sampling, right? And not encouraging competitive, sports too early on. And now we're in a whole new world as we, carefully are looking at the, to the authorities as to how we can get back to play. I will say that our concerns from the baseball industry and with the other professional leagues is that we don't want a lost generation of kids who can't participate in sports. And so we're all working very closely. I know the leaders in my industry from both sides are constantly in conversation with, the NBA, the NFL, and the other professional leagues. And so, we're walking very carefully and trying to figure this out. Unfortunately, I don't have any answers, on this question, but I know that it is a shared concern. So in fact, there's probably less competition when we think about, asking a child to choose baseball over football or basketball. We're happy when kids are just participating and playing. And we know, looking at all our great athletes, they've sampled a number of sports until they've gone to the point when they've started specializing in college and then professionally. Obviously, there's other parameters that we're looking at today because there are certain sports that have more contact over others. Not to say that baseball and softball don't have any, but we're looking at guidelines very cautiously to try and figure out how to get kids back out there in a safe and healthy way, and to work closely with communities and families.
Yeah. And John, I'll add, just to build on what Jean said there, the leagues actually came together, as well as most of the national governing bodies of sport, in 2015 to endorse multi-sport play up through age 12. And since then, the NBA, Major League Baseball, all of them have sent a very clear message that multi-sport play is the way to go when you're younger. I think the challenge is the business model at the community level, where people need to have their mortgages paid 12 months a year. The instinct is still to try and get your kid to sign up for your own sport. So how do we align best practices with the business model that exists at the community level? And how do we change the incentive structures around that? So.
Yeah. And then Tom, while we have you, I think this would be a good question for you as well, is, we have a lot of questions about how to incentivize better coach education. Do you have thoughts about how do we get more qualified coaches, such as a certification process, whether there's some certification program or financial incentives or, anything like that?
Yeah, look, a lot of progress has been made in recent years in identifying best practices in coaching, the type of skills that we want coaches to have, modules like How to Coach Kids, which is, a website, free 30-minute courses, a list of resources by sport and by topic and by age group. It's all either out there or coming online shortly. I think the next question is, how do we incentivize and perhaps even mandate organizations to use these best-in-class tools? So I think that's a conversation to be had through the national governing bodies. I think the U.S. Olympic Committee perhaps could play a supportive role there. And I do think there is a conversation to be had at the municipal level regarding the power of the permit. You know, Park and Recs need, boy, they're really taxed right now, and we got to be careful not to ask too much of them. But you know, those who control field space, I think, could lift the conditions under which people get access to them. So don't just ask organizations if they have insurance, but also say, oh, okay, are your coaches trained in these key competencies in working with kids, or other criteria related to access or otherwise. I understand that's a big challenge, and Kristine knows what a challenge that is more than anyone else. But that's what our job is at the Aspen Institute, is to pump big ideas into the bloodstream and see what takes.
I'd like to add to that, and that's just that a public health strategy that has worked in the past and who could work to address that question. Something that Kristine said earlier is that parents want to do what's best for their kids. Adults want to do what's best for their kids. And a strategy is social pressure. And so if this is something that it's socially unacceptable to be coached by a team or officiate or have an official who is not trained, that pretty soon it will just be norm. You wouldn't see someone smoking cigarettes on a playing field or really anywhere that's a health related or educational related facility. So this is just something else that we just have to make it the social norm, that it's socially unacceptable not to have these trainings. And it can be community driven. It can be crowdsourced through media and marketing and communication, that this is the way we're going to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to add 2 more points to what you said, Tom. You know, one, I think, you know, under COVID-19, all coaches most likely are going to have to go through some additional training in this brave new world. What that will look like, we're unsure at the moment. And similar to the exercise we had to go through with safe sports, you know, we had to look at a whole new way of certifying and making sure that kids remain safe. So there might be an opportunity, as there could be a requirement to train under COVID-19 health and safety guidelines. Can we amplify and add in some other resources? But, you know, I would agree with you. We need to lean on the NGBs and these other, you know, national bodies to really mandate. And that's where we can engage the government and policymakers to, you know, have this enforceable. The second point is, you know, working with the Players Association, there is so much talent out there with retired players. So just speaking alone in the baseball industry, you know, our foundation, we host the Hank Aaron Invitational on a yearly basis. It's amazing where we have over 200, you know, kids of very diverse backgrounds, you know, low income, and they're being trained by over 20 former professional coaches. They're also mentored off the field. There's guest speakers. But I know from former baseball players, the game remains a love in their hearts. And oftentimes they're reaching into their own pockets to give back to their communities and running free clinics, you know, and helping kids more than just on the field. I mean, the stories you should hear, I mean, it would just, you know, really warm your heart. And so this could be a prime moment to really engage everyone in the other sports as well. But, you know, speaking from baseball, I know that from the Players Association and former players, they are our PhD of baseball. They are the best of the best. They have the skills. They understand how to play the game, you know, more than anyone else. And so, you know, it remains in their blood. They want to give back and they want to help kids. And this might be the right moment to start thinking about how to activate a program to bring them back into our communities. So, you know, thank you for just, you know, stirring that conversation. But I think coaching is a really key area in moving forward as we look, you know, to 8 and 10 years. How do we improve that area?
Gotcha. All right, before I wrap up here, Kristine, any 30 seconds of last thought?
I really appreciate being part of this conversation. Appreciate the work that you're doing, Tom and John and the rest of the team at Project Play. Want to do a plug for NiCole's real emphasis on a health-focused approach. And also want to urge all of us to be thinking, how do we, as we're rebuilding facilities and sports fields and so forth, that we're doing it with flexibility and adaptability in mind. how can we make sure we are stretching our dollars to create courts and fields that are flexible and aren't just solely and strictly usable for one particular sport. I think that's an important point that hasn't really been mentioned yet, and something that we're of course sensitive to. So thank you to NiCole and Jean, and to you, Tom. It's been a real great opportunity to chat with you all.
Well, and thank you to all. You leave me optimistic that we can turn this crisis into an opportunity and reimagine youth sports in America. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have right now. Again, want to thank the panelists, want to thank our Project Play team, Emily, Rania, John, Jennifer, Marty, and Fumi. And to you, our Project Play network, for the questions and comments shared during this hour. Your ideas will help us design next steps in leading this national conversation about how we collectively can turn this crisis into an opportunity and reimagine youth sports. Stay tuned for next steps in that process, which will lead to this year's Project Play Summit, scheduled for October 14th. The best way to stay in the loop is to sign up for our newsletter at as.pn/pp subscribe. And if you aren't already, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Aspen Inst Sports for the latest on our Project Play reports, as well as news and resources. So stay safe, be well, and see you soon.